Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Psyched Conversations between a clinical psychologist, which is Dr. Suzanne Manser, and myself, a psychic, Angela Bixby. We are excited today to kind of do interview style. So we're going to pose 5 questions that each of us are going to answer from our different vantage points, and we're looking forward to sharing this with you. Suzanne, Dr. Manser, great to have you here. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty well, Angela. How are you?
Good, thank you. Glad it's Friday.
Me too. It's been a week.
Yes, we've had a lot of those lately, all of us humans, I mean. So,
Uh-huh.
which is partly why, audience, we thought, well, this might be kind of fun and lighten things up a little bit for people and still be of service, right? In hearing and seeing the differences between our two practices. All right, so we'll jump right in. So, Dr. Manser, I'm going to go ahead and fire this question at you first, and then I'll let you, fi sort of fire it back at me. How do your patients respond when you give them positive feedback within the context of a session?
I love this question. I know we were talking about it a little bit beforehand, but I love this question because, I think when people think about therapy in general, the sort of idea of it is that it's always like hard and heavy and serious and maybe sad. Um, and it certainly is not always hard and heavy and serious and sad. Totally depends, obviously, on what the person is bringing in and what's happening in that moment. But there are so many times when I will tell somebody that I'll point out that they just did a skill that we had talked about the week before, or, oh my gosh, you did that thing that you weren't able to do 3 months ago, or whatever it might be, or just, appreciating that they're still hanging in there, appreciating that they're still offering themselves compassion, doing the hard things, whatever it might be. And people are, at least in my experience, often shocked to hear that they're doing something kind of right, quote unquote, because typically from our own sort of internal experience, it still feels hard, or it still feels laborious, or burdensome in some way. And so to have the experience of that was hard, but to hear it might have been hard, but it looked like it actually went really well. Um, is sort of news to people a lot of the time. So it's really fun to watch them kind of light up and realize that, oh, actually I am doing this, or I am showing up for myself in a really good way. So it's kind of a bummer, but really lovely to kind of a bummer that people don't know that already about
Mhm.
themselves. But really lovely to be able to give them the feedback that whatever it might be, that I think they're doing well in some way, and to see them actually receive that, which can be a whole thing all on its own. There are certainly lots of people who don't want to receive that feedback, or who feel too insecure to believe that I am honest when I'm saying you're doing a good job in whatever way I'm saying that. Um, how about you, Angela? For you, I'm curious. I'm genuinely curious with your folks, because it's such a different process with therapy. At least the way I see it, it's often weeks and months of hard work, and so it's this back and forth and kind of a process, an iterative process. For you, when you're working with your clients, um, I'm curious about what kind of positive feedback you get to offer, and
Mhm.
then same question, how do they receive it?
Yeah. I love the work I do. It's always an honor to work with the clients that find their way to me. And yeah, it's so different from being a therapist because it's often just one session. They'll come to me for a reading. I have lots and lots of clients over the last 15 years that come back for repeat sessions and have come back, months later and years later and become really regular clients. So that's a little different, but by and large, it's usually just, I work with a person for a client excuse me, I work with a client for a session or two, and then that's sort of it. So there's sort of a lot to do to compress into that one session with a new client. And so, I find that I've only had a few clients that when I say to them that something's really normal that they're asking, or if it's a topic that they're a little nervous to ask about, I'll tell them it's totally normal and people ask about it all the time. It's only been a few clients that have said, "Oh, I bet you say that to everyone," right? That have sort of responded as though they didn't really want to take it all the way in, or perhaps didn't. believe that. But then even some of those clients have gone on to give me like positive feedback or positive reviews saying things like, I wasn't sure if she was for real, but she really is. And, when you leave, you feel really good, like her energy is really good. So sometimes it's those clients that'll kind of realize in the end that I was being sincere. It's just sort of how I am. I'm honest and truthful and really nurturing. So I do it a lot of times. I will also do it just to put people at ease. Because as you can imagine, if people are coming to me for just a half hour, an hour session, they might be nervous too, right? If they have, I get a lot of clients who haven't done this before. And so I listen to that when they say that, and I try to be right there and just really embodying as much kindness and compassion for them and holding that positive space for them while also doing, the work for them and informing them in the ways that they're curious about from spirit. So it's a bit of a mixed bag how I do it, but I absolutely try to do it often because people are brave that are coming to me for a reading, especially the ones who have never done it. They'll be like, okay, I read your guidance, right? So I try to also prepare clients ahead of time with guidance for how to come to a session so that they can feel like they know how to show up, especially if they've never done it before, so I give them steps that they read through before a session, but then sometimes they're still nervous, as you can imagine, as they're going through things. So it ends up making the work more satisfying and rich and fulfilling for them if I can meet them in their humanness and, encourage them about that and kind of get that stuff done earlier in the session so they can kind of relax. And then they can really be open to receive a lot more actively. If there were any weird disconnect between our personalities or something, it would be distracting for the session, for them mostly. And I just really want my clients to have a good experience. So I do everything that I can to kind of put them at ease and then normalize things that they might be a little nervous about asking.
I can imagine how helpful that is, and I do that to some extent as well, but the idea of just giving them some sense of what to expect,
Mhm.
so that a little, like as you said, a little bit of anxiety is maybe relieved or taken out of the way so that they can be more present, and receive whatever you have to give them when you offer it, especially if it's emotional in nature, which I can imagine a lot of the work that you do, a lot of the messages you bring through, I'm guessing, are quite emotional in nature.
Mhm. Absolutely. I'm also very open when because I'm an empath, so I feel emotions from whether it's passed on loved ones that I'm connecting to for the client or the client's emotions sometimes in a situation. And so I'm also just very transparent with that. And I'll say, oh my gosh, I can feel this. I could even start crying. So I do my best to be very open with my clients about those things because then it further normalizes it for them too, if they feel waves of emotion coming through while we're talking to a passed on loved one or something. Yeah.
That makes sense. And it leads me to one of our next questions, which is how do you bring yourself into the room? And you just answered it, at least to some extent. Like how, when you're sitting with one of your clients, how does your client experience you as Angela, the psychic, not just a generic psychic? How much of yourself do you bring into the room?
As much as possible while remaining professional, so really like optimal authenticity with optimal professionalism too. I'm also very open and transparent about how much I love doing this work and how happy I am to have found this work as a second career. I was a woman who was very unsatisfied in her career in, the first part of my adult life. And so I do my best to share all of myself with clients, in the most respectful ways. Again, I operate under the premise that we're all psychic, right? Because I know and believe that we all are, whether people are in touch with it or not. And so if I'm hiding something or obscuring something or not being transparent, I operate under the premise that people can sort of feel that and detect that through their spidey senses themselves, whether they're aware that they have them. So again, interested in leaving clients, satisfied to the best of my abilities with the work that I do bring as much as I can into myself, or much as myself that I can into my sessions.
And I can only imagine that that makes, as you said, that that puts people so at ease because they can feel your genuineness. They don't have to guess at what you might be, feeling or thinking or how you might be responding to them if you're just authentic with yourself as you show up with them.
Yeah, thank you. One thing that happens that's funny is sometimes I'll get really cursy in sessions. And so I'll say to the client, well, I guess it's a day that I'm cursing a lot. And sometimes that'll make them giggle. And that does seem to bring down kind of their walls and the anxiety a bit. And often they're like, girl, that's my second language. You're speaking my language. It's all good, right? Like, and so yeah, again, I sort of move within the kind of the guardrails of the session as best I can to stay as open and authentic as possible. How about you, Dr. Manser? How do you bring yourself into your sessions, and what does that look like as a therapist?
Well, in thinking about this question, I was thinking about when I was a new therapist, I think I was probably pretty kind of wooden. I didn't bring a lot of myself in, both because I was insecure as a therapist, and I think I thought I was supposed to be sort of this kind of professional, robotic kind of person. But also thinking back to that time, I wasn't super comfortable with myself, just personally. And so I think as I got more comfortable as a therapist professionally, and as I did my own work and got good with myself personally, I was much more able to show up as myself in the therapy room. And I can only imagine that that's a much more engaging experience for my patients to have sort of a real person who, laughs and I'm humorous and all of those things, but I also, I'll fumble over words or I won't be able to find a word or I'll say something dumb or whatever. And I think that has real value too, because I'm friendly in all of those things, but I'm also a real human in terms of making mistakes and to be able to model that for people to just, flub a word or not come up with a word or say something wrong and kind of just keep going as I do. I think has been a really nice modeling experience to show people that there's no perfection ever needed in this room, and perfection actually works at cross purposes with what we're generally trying to accomplish. Um, so for me, it's been a much more enjoyable process and experience as I am and have been more myself with my patients. And I think again, same as I said to you, I can only imagine that they feel more comfortable with a real person um, than
Absolutely.
with, some generic idea of what a therapist is supposed to be.
Absolutely. And I love your description of feeling wooden in the beginning as a young therapist. I relate to that. When you share it, how you normalize things for your patients, I was psychically, because this is part of how I operate in the world. So I'm just going to say it here. I was getting a prospective patient of yours psychically, like exhaling, like an exhale when they were sitting in
Mhm.
your office and recognized that, like, oh my gosh, she's a normal person was sort of the feeling I was getting from, a generic client on your behalf. So I know it puts people at ease when you are able to be like that and bring yourself into the sessions that way.
Oh, I love
Beautiful.
that. Thank you.
Sure. So, how do you handle it when you have a patient that you don't see eye to eye with?
So that's an interesting question to follow the like always being, not always, but being authentic in session question, because when I don't see eye to eye with a person, it probably depends in part on what we're talking about. Um, if it's relevant to if I'm talking about neuroplasticity or something and they
Mhm.
don't believe in it, that would be relevant to talk about. But if it's, politically, they have a different view, or um, in terms of civil rights, they have a different view, that those sorts of things. Um, that can be so tricky. Actually, I'm going to back up. Take away the people with different views on rights, because I think there's all kinds of trickiness there that I don't necessarily want to get into today. If I just have a
Fair.
patient who I don't kind of vibe with,
Hmm.
who, I probably wouldn't be friends with if we were both
Hmm.
on the street. Um, I've actually been a lot surprised, because I'm a somewhat judgmental person. I'm not the most like Mother Teresa kind of person sort of out in the world. But what I have found is that as a therapist, when I'm in this room, when I'm in this chair, and somebody walks through that door, there's an automatic respect for the fact that they chose to walk through that door. And so that is always my starting point is, you know, whatever it took to get them to walk through that door, they're trying to take accountability for something. They're trying to make their lives better. They're trying to do something for themselves. And so for me, even if our personalities aren't conflict or whatever else, I can always find and have been surprised to always find at least a kernel of something that I certainly at least respect and even like about the person. And so once I can connect with that, we're kind of off to the races and it's fine because that's what comes to the forefront. Um, so again, unless it's something that I need to kind of confront them about or wrestle with them about in terms of a concept that's relevant to what we're talking about, if it's more that I just don't love them or vibe with them, I work really hard to find a piece of them that I do like or respect or vibe with, and that makes the whole thing so much easier.
Beautiful.
How about you, Angela? What happens when somebody comes into your space that you don't feel great about?
Hearing how you responded helped me to call up a bunch of different scenarios for myself too. It's a thing, right? Absolutely, as you know, and I'm sure everybody listening can imagine that, um, working with either of our professions or either of us, it's very just like anything in life, right? Think about our kids or myself when I was in school, I would get along with some teachers and not others, right? Like there's just we don't all get along sometimes, right? So like I understand that, and I understand that for both of us. And so yeah, I mean, I've dealt with some of what you've dealt with, even when you initially started talking about values and things in the beginning, and really not seeing eye to eye with a client. If I'm in that kind of a situation, I really stick to the parameters of my session. The time that I've provided the guidance, I just keep it really professional and obviously don't kind of weigh in if they're making comments about something that I totally disagree with that has nothing to do with the session that I'm reading. Okay. Now, and then there's the other camp that you sort of went into and talked about yourself. And so, where there are clients that, there are a couple that come to mind where it's tricky because a couple clients come to me and it's sort of like they want to run things by me and they want to kind of hear that spirit agrees with them. And so that gets to be tricky if I know that I'm about to say something that they're going to not really like. It's not going to necessarily be what they want to hear, right? That is the one that is the most common in my practice, is when I'm about to deliver something that the way they've set up the question or what they've already shared, I already know that it might feel challenging for them to hear it and receive it. And the way that I work, a little different than a psychologist, of course, is that, Spirit and I, my guides and I have a deal that like whatever they bring up, I'm to deliver to the client. There are very few situations that I would just not deliver based upon. And that would be something, well, I won't go into that. But so that's kind of, my deal. It's part of my integrity. It's part of my professional ethics. It might sound weird to have like ethics with guides, but yes, they're a thing. And so I know that it's something that I have to sort out quickly how to deliver. And so it's often the situation where if someone's talking to me about, say, like a familial or a relationship situation, and they might be upset about it, and they're wanting to get Spirit's perspective on the other side of the equation that they're talking about. And Spirit will say, well, the other person has the rights for this and that. So I deliver it as directly as I can. I'm a direct communicator, so I don't belie my personality and my style per se. But and I just sometimes I'll say, okay, I'm just going to say it, and then we can, break this apart together and talk about this. And so I've done it kind of both ways. I'm really lucky that I haven't been in a lot of sessions, or it's been a lot of years that I've been in a session with someone that is clearly just not liking me in the session. It's always a particular kind of trickiness. I say to them, I am not for everyone, and that's okay. Of course, I'm not for everyone. There are lots of people that do what I do. So if this didn't, I don't say to them like, of course it's okay if you don't come back, but I try to kind of acknowledge it so that they're not, kind of sitting over there again with maybe the perceptions that they have about what psychics can lean into and feel, whether they're overtly showing it or not. I just do my best to keep it transparent, say things that are coming up, but just um, keep it out of a situation where I'd be, kind of going toe to toe or having a conflict with a client. I have had that happen before.
Have you?
Yeah, I had a client that was particularly difficult for me, a male client, so they came with a lot of an older male client, so they came with a lot of some of that patriarchal stuff, and they decided they could treat me a certain way, even though we're in a Zoom session. Um, and in that case, I lost it and was not very professional. So I make mistakes sometimes. I'm human. And then we broke it down. And then I also told him that we won't work together again. So I was able to repair the situation, clean it up enough to get through the session. I gave them the option to have their money back, right? Like I did all the professional things and apologized, of course. And then just, parted ways in that case. But that's an extreme case. It's only happened, once or twice in 15 years. So I'm really grateful for that.
It's interesting that you bring that up because as you were talking, I was thinking that the one situation that I run into from time to time, but it has absolutely come up repeatedly, is male patients who are just misogynistic enough to
Mhm.
somehow be in my room but not want to hear what I have to say. And so, I mean, and it is just, it's so clear when this happens where they just talk over me and any suggestion that I have is not good enough or not going to work or whatever. And so there are those kind of situations where it's not necessarily that I don't like the person, but we definitely don't see eye to eye. And
Mhm.
at some point, I will say something like, gosh, it's my experience that whenever I offer you an idea or a recommendation or whatever, you're not interested in hearing what I have to say. And, you rarely let me finish a sentence. I'm wondering what you're getting out of being here, and so try to not too defensively, but try to like really be curious about I mean, I would suspect that what's happening for this person is that they're getting their ego stroked because they're getting to put a woman down in their mind, and that's what they're getting out of being there at a subconscious level. But when you bring it up in a conscious level, I don't know that I've ever actually had a patient who has sort of realized who then says, "Oh gosh, I didn't realize I was doing it." Now that I say this, so anyway, I don't know that with any of those folks that I'm thinking of, I've ever actually been able to get them to decide that I might be worth listening to. Um, so that can be a tricky, that's one place where I haven't had a successful sort of way to work through that, I guess,
Mm, interesting.
yet.
Yet, of course. And if you don't mind my asking, any of those clients that you've said that to sort of said, I'm wondering why we're still doing this based upon what I'm observing in your behavior. Do they come back for another session with you?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is, and that's where that I do get kind of active about what are we accomplishing here? What's your
Hmm.
goal? And do I agree that we're actually working on it? But they do come back, and that's, I mean, every one that I'm thinking of anyway, nobody has ever sort of taken that as
Mm.
oh, okay, you're right, let's end. It's seen as sort of an opportunity to just keep doing what they're doing, I think.
Okay, got you. Interesting. Yeah, like I said, I'm in a different position than you are because if something's not going well, I can just be like, we're not going to work together again. It's different when you're in your work, right? Because therapeutic process, time, all of that. So
Mhm.
witnessing all of that you move through when you don't see eye to eye with your patients. Interesting. All right. So how about this one, Suzanne? How do you build rapport with a patient? Or do you just jump right in?
Okay, this is one of my favorite questions because, in full transparency, I did my doctoral dissertation on the therapeutic alliance, which is the concept of rapport. So I have all kinds of information that I could offer on this. However, I will say, with therapy, the finding, and I did my dissertation I don't know, 25 years ago or longer. And it's still a very robust finding that it doesn't matter what kind of therapy you do, it is the rapport that is the thing that can predict how well the therapy will go.
Wow.
So rapport is super, super important for therapy. And um, I am probably because I did so much work on it in my early career, I'm super, super focused on it, especially in the first three sessions, because the first three sessions are the important ones, especially. And so I will really make sure that I'm putting aside my agenda, because I always have some agenda, but I will say it. But I make sure that I'm really understanding what their agenda is, what their goals are, um, what they want to get out of it, not just in terms of here's what it will look like by the end, but here's how I want to feel. Um, and so to make sure that I'm prioritizing their goals, that I'm prioritizing their experience, their feelings. I'm the expert on how therapy goes, but they're the expert on themselves.
Mhm.
And to sort of offer that, not that I have to offer that expertise to them, but when I invite them to take the expertise that they have, um, that is a really nice way to kind of get the rapport going and be clear that I have so much respect for the person sitting across from me. And that I really, really care about not only what they want to get to, but how they want to get there. And I can talk to them, obviously, about whether I think that could work that way. But for the person on the other, on the in the other chair to feel like they are being seen and heard and respected, and that we're generally on the same page, that's sort of a very basic goal of mine in the first, especially 3 sessions, every session, but especially 3 sessions. So the question of how do you build rapport and do you just jump right in? For me, it's a both. We jump right in, but in the soup of rapport, I'm always like
Mhm.
checking the soup temperature and making sure that the rapport is feeling good on both ends.
Awesome.
How about you?
I, yeah, thanks for asking. I loved hearing that you did your dissertation on this, basically on this topic. It's so helpful to hear. I didn't know that. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that tidbit about yourself and your career too. So full disclosure, before I did this work, I was in a sales and marketing career. And so I was taught how to build rapport in the 90s on sales calls, right? So I had to, because a big difference between my practice and yours is a lot of times it's just somebody coming in for one session. It's most often what it is, right? And then so I'm not selling them a bunch of sessions where it's one session and then that's it, unless they choose to come back. And so rapport really has to be established quickly. And I agree with you. I value the importance of it for the work that I do for all the reasons that you shared yourself for how you approach it in your practice and for all the right reasons for your patients. And so I feel the same way and I share your values in your approach in that way as best I can. I just tend to do it pretty quickly. So when I worked in person with clients, which I did through from 2011 to 2019, and I've been all online since. When I would work in person, there would be a little bit of time as I'm like greeting the person in the lobby, and we might be chit-chatting about whatever, what they were just doing, how they found the place, are they nervous, whatever. Just really kind of working on tuning into how they're feeling and making them feel comfortable as we're headed into our session, and then we get into the session, and I try to give a little bit of spiel right up front, right? I just try to stay in my leadership as best I can with an open heart. And I know from the work that I do that the more that I stay open and sort of beam my heart light towards them, that helps. It just, I can see it. And whether they sense it or not, they usually say, I feel a lot better. I don't know why, if they're less um, in like the energy language that I am. But I know that it's because that I'm sort of leading in that way energetically. And so that's a big part of it too. But yeah, rapport is really important, like you said. And people will bring things to me, as you can imagine, that are really personal and that they might be judging themselves about because I have them bring a list of questions for a reading. So it's different than therapy in that there might be a lot of different things that they want to hit on, and they totally don't want to go in and talk about them at all. And I'm not a clinical therapist, of course, we're not going to do that. Yet they still end up saying to me, offering me feedback, saying, "I feel like you're like a psychic therapist because I feel really good after talking to you, and like I really kind of move some of my emotions here." So it's very important, as you stated. And again, staying open-hearted is one of the best ways that I can help establish that pretty quickly with my clients.
The other thing that you hit on that I want to reinforce is the I forget how you said it, and you spoke about it in other places today, but is the explanation of what's going to happen, the preparation, and
Mhm.
the idea that it's so important to help especially if it's a person who's not ever been to therapy or to a psychic before, but to just have a sense of what to expect and that whatever you bring into the room is welcome. That, as you said, personal stuff, hard stuff, embarrassing stuff,
Mhm.
that's typically what people come to me for. I imagine that's often what
Mhm.
people come to you for.
Mhm.
And to be a person and to make it so clear and known that whatever it is that you're bringing in is absolutely fine, is welcome and is going to be honored. I think that that's such a great way to approach a lot of things, but approach rapport, especially because, again, to me, rapport has a very clear foundation in mutual respect. And to be able to say whatever you're bringing in is welcome here is kind of as respectful as you can get, in my opinion.
Thank you. I appreciate that reflection very much, especially from someone of your caliber and training. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So, this last question for both of us is fun to end on this one. And this came from, I was inspired by Dr. Suzanne Manser. There was a time on the socials that she would post about this. She would talk about ever wonder what's on your therapist's mind while they're like listening to you or you're in a session, right? While the client's talking or the patient's talking. And I always loved that, kind of seeing that. So, Suzanne, what does, I know you're present in your situations and you're there for your patients, but what kinds of things cross your mind that you're perhaps not sharing for obvious reasons? It's not part of the therapeutic process for your patient during a session.
I love this question because when I was doing this on the socials, it was people were always kind of shocked at, you know, it could be like again, I am listening, I'm present, but also if somebody's wearing like a really cute shirt, I might be like, oh damn, I wonder where they got that. I love it. Like that might be a quick thought that I have. But generally it's things like like I will look at the clock to see how much time we have left because it's important to know if we have 20 minutes left, I might be able to get into a topic. If we have 3 minutes left, probably don't want to get into a deep topic. So, looking at the clock and assessing time. And because I'm me, I will look at the clock, assess the time, and 2 minutes later completely forget what time it is and have to look at the clock again. So that's just sort of how my brain goes. So I will look at the clock, several times during a session just to make sure that I'm being respectful of time and paying attention to how deep we're going, those sorts of things. I have a lot going on in my brain when I'm sitting with a patient. I'm thinking about, what they've told me about their history and how past dynamics might be applying to whatever they're talking about. I'm certainly paying attention to their body language and how comfortable or uncomfortable they seem. I'm paying attention to my body language and how comfortable or uncomfortable or how I'm reacting to what they just said. I'm thinking about the goals that they have for therapy and are we on track or did we just wander off somewhere and do we need to get back? So, I'm thinking about all these things that are just assessing whether what we're talking about right now is useful and in what way is it useful? Because, there's certainly times when we're talking about the weather or their dog or something that's not, therapeutically super important but it's rapport building and it's part of just a human conversation and it's part of like let's just get in here and relax our nervous system so that we can actually get into some work. So a lot of what's going on in my brain is where are we in the session? Is it the beginning, the middle, the end? And what do I want to accomplish with the time that we've got left, given where this person is, how this person seems to be doing, and all these other factors? And by the way, if you have really cute shoes, I'm going to notice that too. Um, So there's a
I
lot
love
usually
that.
going on in my brain.
Yeah, I love that.
You, Angela. What's going on in your brain as you sit with a client?
My brain's a busy brain, and when I go into a session, it tends to be pretty quiet because I am just focused on what I'm bringing through psychically for the client. And but there's still really busy brain. There's still time for things to be kind of jumping around and flitting about, similar to kind of how you explained it. So for me, it's often just like you said, right? Like something I might be thinking something complimentary about them. And if they weren't, asking me to look at their questions, I might be having more human moments with them and complimenting them on their cute top, or I love the way their hair is, or where they get their glasses, that kind of thing. And I jump right into that if, that's something that I'm feeling, so that kind of thing might be on my mind. A lot of times it's, things like, I understand, like I might be thinking to myself while I'm reading for them. Again, we get into this kind of metacognition thing that happens within my brain where they're asking a question, and either myself in my mind, I might be thinking, this isn't the question they really want to ask. Or my guides might be saying, this is just a warm-up question. They're going to get to the question they really want to ask in 3 questions, kind of a thing. So sometimes it's usually really focused on the session. And sometimes it's like, oh my God, I noticed my stomach, like, and thinking my stomach's growling, I'm hungry. Right. So like those kinds of things are pretty normal. I don't completely lose time in a session, although often I do. My human body makes things cross my mind sometimes like that. Um, and a lot of times I just say it to people, if it's something that's like if they ask a question and I can tell that it was a hard question for them to ask, I might say to them, like, you're really brave. That was a really courageous question to ask. And I'm so excited. I can't wait to give you the answer. So sometimes I'll mix in some of that rapport building because that's what's on my mind, that I'm really looking at them in a loving light and thinking about how brave they are for asking a certain question in a session. I really, and I don't hold back if I'm excited. Like when a client will ask something like, "Can you see if there are any blocks to XYZ in my life?" or "What can I do to improve PDQ in my life?" I will say to them like, "Oh my God, that's a great question." I just try to compliment them for being a great and self-aware human because they're clearly here to be a better person with the questions they're asking, which I have a lot of respect for. So it's mostly client centric. It's sometimes body centric. It's often style. Yeah. If it's the client, regular clients, it's different. There's more of that, where again, we've already talked about this, but how I bring myself in and that rapport building. Sometimes I'll even be more myself. We might be in the middle of a big topic, but I'll say, and I have to just hit pause because I love your glasses. And then we'll go back into the depth. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but yeah, hopefully that gives our audience an idea of what's on their minds when we're in session.
I think we could probably spend an entire episode talking just about that because I mean, it really is. I would be fascinated to hear more about, what you think about when a client talks about this thing or talks about that thing, or if a client seems upset in this way, kind of how you think about it and if you direct, things in a particular way, or if you're letting yourself be directed completely, or, kind of how that goes. I just think there's a lot that we could dive into there next time or another time.
Absolutely. And I will quick answer you on one of those. I'm still directing even when the guides are coming through. So it's unless I'm in an event where I'm doing trance channeling and no one's asking me questions while I'm doing that, that's more spirit directed, but by and large in my one-to-one sessions I'm still I'm still retaining agency and guiding the session and in my leadership, absolutely, because for all the reasons and professionalism and all of that. So anyway, that
Mhm.
just came
Mhm.
up and wanted to come out from what you said,
Yeah,
so
that's great. That's
thanks for
great. Thank
letting me
you.
share that. But yeah, I'm sure there's a lot that we could get into. The one thing that does happen on this topic is sometimes people will read the guidance and then they'll ask a question. So they'll pose a really long question. And I think sometimes they're thinking it's going to be a simple answer, and then I'll start to teach and I'll start to say, well, this is my perspective on this, and this is how I would tell you spirit guides show up in your life. So when I throw this back to you and say, so which areas of your life do you want to hear from them on, sometimes they'll ask a question and then I start with the teaching and they're like, oh, never mind, I don't want to spend time on that, you know what I mean? So sometimes they're
Uh-huh.
asking questions that are maybe bigger than they realize, might generate a lot more conversation than they want me to spend the time on. So I just keep it
Mhm.
really open and back and forth. And I'll be like, okay, I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes on this topic. Like, do you want to go somewhere else first? And we can save this for the end. So again, to step into agency in the session, I do a lot of that too, in case I can detect that they're asking a big question and they might not want to spend lots of minutes on that.
And I can
Yeah.
imagine that that makes them feel so much more comfortable to, again, have a little bit of sense of agency and control
Mhm.
and uh, view into what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate
Mhm.
that. Yay. Well, it's been a pleasure to talk to you today, Dr. Manser.
You too, Angela. Thank you.
You are welcome. We will say goodbye to our audience. We're recording today on Friday, May 15th, 2026. This has been Psyched, and we will see you soon.